competitors. I've been reffing since 2008. I've been involved in the program since '99. I'm very excited about the game this year. It's awesome. I really like the theme. It's got a lot of really cool missions, a lot of challenging missions. There's a lot of potential for points. So we're going to start off going over just exactly what's in the challenge guide. We're going to go over robot game rules over here. And then when we switch to missions, we're all going to go and gather around the table, and we'll actually be able to see and play with models and test difficulty and kind of assess different situations and what those might be scored as. So cool, let's get started in. A lot of these are going to be pretty self-explanatory. The ones that I've seen over the years that are a little bit more of a gray area or that come up more often, I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about. So gracious professionalism, obviously that's in all 4 of the levels of first, and that's obviously there's a reason that it's number 1. So we expect your kids to act well with respect and kindness. It's very, very, very rarely is that ever an issue. We have some kids that get really, really worked up at the competitions, which actually I like to see, because if the students that they come to the table and it's just a routine, it's not really. It's just, an everyday routine, but students that actually get excited and they have worked for weeks and it's the culmination, they get to the state tournament, they get up and this is their last match and, they're really intense and you can see it on their face. That's when, they're really getting something out of it. They're getting excited. So there are occasions where we have students kind of have a meltdown when they're under pressure, but again, that's usually handled pretty quietly. So not really that big of a deal. Interpretation. So if a detail isn't mentioned, then it doesn't matter. So LEGO likes to give you a lot of freedom in how you do missions. So they specifically word rules in a certain way to where you can come up with really elaborate and really crazy ways that the people that wrote the rules at the time didn't even think that was going to even happen. So, and if a detail isn't mentioned, then it doesn't matter. So if it says, knock this bar over, it doesn't matter if you drive over it, hit it with a weight, it doesn't matter, just knock the bar over. Simply knock the bar over. Cool. Benefit of the doubt. If the ref feels something's a very tough call, they get a benefit of the doubt. And usually the object is scored or a mission is considered complete. It's not to be used as a strategy. So usually if some freak accident happens on the field and, whoa, that was really lucky, it's on the line, well, okay, we'll go ahead and give it to you. But if we notice that it's right on the edge of a rule and it's like your 3rd match in a row that you're doing that, it kind of goes beyond the benefit of a doubt and it starts to become a strategy. Variability. This is a very important one. So everybody is building their own table, and although everybody has guides on how to build their tables, out of 2x4s and out of materials, you will get a 2x4 that may be a little warped, or a splinter that sticks out, or a little tiny gouge in the wood, or a mat is slightly wrinkled. There are a lot of ways that the table at the competition will be slightly different than your table. So ways to combat that you'll learn at home. So when we go to set up the table, it's very important that your mat is all the way south against the south wall and centered east to west. So the gap on the east and the west sides of the tables will be a point of variability. So if your mission is to go all the way to the far end of the table and you align with the wall and you depend on that specific spacing off of that wall, that is a point where the variability between your table and a table at a competition might be different, and it may completely affect your entire mission. So instead, maybe you should use a point of reference that is something that shouldn't change, which would be the mat. The mat is going to be the same everywhere. So just be very aware of variability, especially lighting even. Information superiority, obviously, missions and field setup is where it's really going to, the mission criteria on how, the method in which you complete a mission. We'll go over that when we're at the table, but that is obviously where you need to start. If there is a situation where it's not clearly defined in the rules and you really could think that your strategy would work, but you really need some clarification, it's usually covered in the updates. So those are, if you've come up with kind of a peculiar situation and you talk to another team and they're kind of wondering the same thing, usually means a lot of teams are coming to that same conclusion or that same situation, and it's usually addressed in a robot game update. Definition, a match is when your team walks up to the table and it's a 2.5-minute round where they launch your robot, and at the end of the match we score everything, and that's where you get your score. A mission is the opportunity for the robot to earn points. So that's any time that the robot leaves and actually goes out to do something and then come back. So that would be a mission. So for example, moving a satellite from the base all the way over into orbit, that would be considered a mission. So that is something that you do an action and it gives you points back. Equipment is everything you bring to a match for mission-related activity. So that is, if you have a robot and nothing is attached to your robot, and then you bring a whole bin of different attachments to do different things on the field, that is all considered equipment. Whether your robot actually uses it, or whether you're using it as storage or a jig, or anything that you bring with you to the table is considered equipment. Robot is the controller and the equipment that you've combined with it by hand, which is not intended to separate from it except by hand. So your robot can change. So if you bring your chassis, your basic robot in, and you take a piece of equipment and you attach it, that new robot is now a bigger robot with an attachment, but that entire thing is considered your robot. So the equipment is all the stuff that is still not attached to your robot. Mission model is a Lego element or structure that's already at the field, so that's everything that is on the mat right now. The field is the robot's game environment, border walls and the mat and all the stuff that's on it. Base. So base is the semicircle in the southwest corner. It is a special area of the map. That is where all the robots do all of their work. Students are not, or anybody, technicians are not allowed to interact with anything outside of base at any time. So if your student comes up, you guys are going to be at home practicing, and you're going to be used to, if your robot goes out and messes something up, we'll just grab it back and reset it real quick, and we'll launch again. At the competition, that's not something that you can casually do. When your team first comes up to the table, everything will be set up correctly as it is to start a match. As soon as the timer is started, nothing gets reset if it's affected outside of base. So basically the student is allowed to work inside of base only, and then the exception to that is they're allowed to retrieve their robot if in case that it goes rogue or gets stuck on something or messes up or something, they can grab the robot and bring it back. So definitions are completely in, completely out, or somewhere in between. And those, we'll go over the differences and how that affects the robot here in just a little bit. So a launch is whenever you launch your robot. It's pretty simple. An interruption is when you stop your robot. It's actually any time that a technician interacts with the robot. So for example, if you have a robot that is in base, you press the launch button, it is now traveling outside of base, and they go, oh, I need to bump it because we're a little bit off center. As soon as they touch the robot after they've launched it, that's considered an interruption. So where the robot is when they touch it, depends on what happens. If it's still inside of the base, it's not a touch penalty, but they have to restart their robot. They're not allowed to launch it while the robot is moving. Then they bump it. As soon as they touch it, they have to grab it and bring it back and relaunch it. So that's something that I see commonly just among nervous kids that don't know any better. But if you tell them that in the very beginning, once you hit the go button, you can touch it. That's not a problem. If you have a bad launch, absolutely, you can grab it and restart it. If you grab it while it's still in base, it's actually penalty free. But once you launch it and then you bump it, you can't just let it go. You have to properly relaunch it. D10 transported, so they've actually fixed this rule from last year, which is fantastic. So when a thing is purposely or strategically being taken, moved, or being released, it is being transported. So for example, if your robot is moving a satellite from the base out to one of the planets, if it is actively taking it or moving it or releasing it, it is transporting it. So that is important when we talk about interruptions here down later in the rules. The point at which that thing is not being transported is when it is no longer in contact with what was transporting it. Okay, software and people. All equipment must be made of Lego-made building parts in original factory condition, so no cutting, dremeling, modifying, gluing, anything like that. Lego string and tubing can be cut shorter. Program reminders, like if your students have trouble remembering what programs you need to run in what order, some students will bring a piece of paper with their missions written in a certain order. And then you can write in permanent marker very small somewhere on your robot to label your robot that it's yours. Or if you have 2 or 3 teams, maybe you'll label which team is which. As long as I can clearly see, or any ref can clearly see that it's not strategic, you'll be okay. Controllers, you're allowed 1 individual controller in any match. Most common is the EV3. Some people still use the NXTs. RCXs are ancient. So all of the controllers have to be left in the pit area. So when your team is at a competition and you're getting ready to go up to the competition area, pretty much the only thing that you should bring with you is the robot, all of its equipment, so attachments and things like that. And then if you have a container to hold everything in, that should be it. You shouldn't bring a spare controller. You shouldn't bring any spare motors. Definitely don't bring any spare mission models, any duplicates. All that needs to stay back in your pit.
Do you still have a rolling cart, or is that been?
Yeah, rolling cart is fine. That depends on venue, but most venues allow that. Yep. So motors, you're only allowed up to 4 individual motors for any particular match. Again, the EV3 motors, the large and the medium are the most common. NXTs are still allowed. Nobody uses RCXs. So anything else, you have to be left in the pit area. So easy. External sensors, as many as you want. You can have a bunch of them mounted. The EV3 and the NXT only support up to 4 sensors at a time, but if you needed to hot swap them during a match, if you have more than that, then you're welcome to do that. There's no limit on those. No other electric or electronic things are allowed in the competition area for mission-related activity. That's usually not that much of a problem. But I think that also covers like cell phones. So it's very clear that nobody has a Bluetooth app on their phone that they're actually trying to control the robot or tablets. Non-electric elements, you cannot use the pullback motors or additional duplicate mission models are not allowed. They cannot come to the field. The reason for that is we don't want to confuse scoring. If you brought yours and they get switched to the official one at the table and all that kind of stuff. Software, you can only use the Mindstorms or Robolab software. That's fine. Technicians, so when you come up to a match, there's only 2 students that are allowed, 2 students called technicians that are allowed at the table at any time. But it is perfectly fine and okay if you guys want to swap out. What a lot of teams will do is, let's say you have a group of, you have 5 missions. What a lot of people will do, or a lot of teams will do, is they'll have the 2 people that start the robot, then they run their mission. And when they get done with their mission, they'll tag out, and the next people will have the next attachment ready. So, or when the robot comes back, one student will grab the old attachments off, step away, and a new student will come in with a new attachment, and they'll get ready to launch and go. That is all perfectly okay if you want to involve your entire team. So instead of just having 2 dedicated technicians, you can have a lot of students. It's perfectly fine. You can do that. Before the match, please show up early to your match. There will be a cuer that'll show you where you need to go. They'll direct you on which table you're going to be playing on, and then you will get a little bit of time before your match to calibrate light sensors. And again, like I said before, the technicians are not allowed to interact with anything outside of base. So if you have students that come up, I highly, highly encourage it. Referees and field reset people are not perfect. When we have done 30 matches straight in a row with no bathroom break and no coffee at 8 in the morning, and we have seen missions and we have reset them over and over and over, we're bound to miss one thing. We didn't reset a lever over here or whatever. So I highly encourage students, they will be familiar with the field. After practicing for weeks and doing missions, they will become very familiar with how everything should look. Make it a habit so when they first come to the table, they should kind of look at all the missions and see what is reset and what is, if something is off a little bit or rotated 90 degrees or anything like that. If they see something that is off, politely ask the ref, hey, could you double check that mission for me and say, hey, I think the satellite is backwards, whatever the case may be. But we're trying not to keep any of the students going out and fixing anything themselves. But if something is off, then ref will fix it for you. Handling during the match. So, like I said, you can't interact with anything that's not completely in base. If your robot unintentionally breaks and it is not strategic, you can get any broken pieces that you need from the table anytime. You're not allowed to cause anything to move or extend over the base, except for launching or storing things. And if it's accidental, you can bring it back in. It's not a problem as long as it's not strategic. So anything that the robot affects outside of base stays as is unless the robot changes it. So like I said, if your robot goes rogue and goes and destroys something and you haven't done that mission, and even if it wasn't supposed to do that, if it destroyed the little carrier in the corner and it knocked it over, I mean, if you don't have points for that, then it's not possible to score that mission for that match. So, mission model handling is a big one. You're not allowed to take mission models apart, and you're not allowed to combine mission models anything that is secure. So anything on the table, you cannot actually brick lock anything together. So if you're transporting a satellite, you can't physically take it and brick lock it together where it's very secure. You're allowed to grab it by the loop, and if it's dangling from the loop and you can pick it up, it's perfectly fine. That's all good. But the test that I will do, or any of the refs that I'll be working with, is if the combination, it must be loose enough so if you pick up the mission model, nothing else comes with it. So if you have a hook, if you have something that physically grabs around a loop and it completely holds it to where it is secure, if I pick up that mission model and your robot comes with it, it fails that. So you guys need to correct that. Even though it fits on there loose and it's not damaging anything, if it can't come off when I lift the mission model, it needs to be fixed. So again, it's not really a big deal. Most people will just use simply a stick or something like that, but nothing can come with it when you pick up the mission model. Storage, we were talking about carts. So base is very small, and especially with some of these missions, you may develop very large attachments and not everything will fit in base. Since you're not allowed to store anything outside of base, you can bring a cart or a portable table with you, something small, and you can use that as an extended base storage. So you can hold extra mission models and stuff outside of that. And then anything out of base counts as being in base, so for scoring or anything. So launching, everything is in base, completely fitting in base, which is the inside border of the walls and then the semicircle arc, and no taller than 12 inches. If that criteria is met, then you can reach down and either press a button or wave at a sensor or however you do to launch your robot. Interrupting. So probably interrupting and stranding are probably the most difficult to get a grasp on, and the most difficult for students to realize what happens and at what happens at what point that you interrupt your robot. So there are robots, things that are being transported, and then mission models that you're not interacting with. So if you interrupt the robot, you stop it and bring it back to your base for a relaunch. If the robot was completely in base, you can relaunch it with no penalty, just like I was talking about earlier. If it is not completely in base, you still bring it back to base, but you get one of the 6 little red disc touch penalties that goes out. So if you're transporting a thing and you left base with it in your most recent launch, it comes back with the robot if you're still transporting it. If you pushed a satellite out, you broke contact with it, and then you said, oh, I've got to bring my robot back. You grab the robot, you bring it back, you relaunch it. It's a touch penalty. Your robot goes out, oh, it's touching the satellite dish again. It's pushing. It gets a little bit farther, but not quite all the way there. If you touch your robot, the item does not come back with your robot because it wasn't in your most recent launch. And if that was the case, then it'd go to the referee, so they'd move it out of your way. If you don't intend to relaunch, so at the very end, if there's 30 seconds or less, you've done your last mission, and the robot is obviously off and not going to score anything, or it's damaging mission models, it is not a problem to reach out and stop your robot, or ask a referee to stop your robot. If you're not going to potentially score any more points, and you may de-score one of your missions by damaging a model, it's not a penalty to stop your mission and end it early. Stranding. So if it loses contact with something that it was transporting, the object needs to come to rest. If it was completely in base, you get to keep it. If it's completely outside of base, you leave it as is. If any part of it is partly in base, it's taken out of play. Give it to the referee. So if you can grab R14 and R15, interrupting and stranding, that is where about 75% of all confusion comes when teams come to the table. Interference. You can't negatively affect the other team that is playing opposite of you. Field damage. If it breaks a mission model, the mission will still count unless the mission was made possible or easier by the damage, or the action that caused it does not score. So we can go over the missions, and I can give you examples of that when we're going over. So at the match ends, as soon as the buzzer goes off, it is a snapshot of exactly how the field is. It is not after the robot stops its mission or stops. It is whenever the buzzer goes off, we'll reach out and we'll stop the robot, and then wherever anything is scored as is. Scoring, we score on an app. We typically, in the past few years, we've used the FLL scoring app on the, I know on the Android Play Store, it is the one by Dominic Vasquez. He produces a really good app, and that's usually what we calculate the score with to be quick. Usually a ref will sit down with your two technicians, and they'll go through mission by mission and say, you got this one, you got this one, you didn't get this one, you got this one, you didn't get this one. If you work with your students ahead of time, especially with an app, and they get the feel of the order of the missions, they'll be very familiar with where on the app what mission should be scored and what shouldn't. So if there is an argument or a debate or any kind of discrepancy, they should be able to tell right then and say, because once the field is reset and the next team is coming on, it's very hard to come back and ask the ref, hey, I thought we got this one. Once they agree upon the score and they sign the piece of paper, then your score is it. So, and then changes for 2018. The major one actually was a robot update last year, so it's not really that big of a change. So, again, if you interrupt while it's transporting something, you can keep that object instead of losing it. Borderlines are part of the area they define, which that's getting really nitpicky. Thickness of the line settles in favor of the team. That's really picky. So conform to local event standards regarding the size and style of your cart so that you bring to the event. Most small portable carts are okay. Anything where that's requiring, if it barely fits through a doorway is going to be kind of shady. If you've got a cart that is in question, I would highly recommend you email the tournament director of the qualifying event you're going to. And then, you can turn off your robot without doing any mission related, if you're done with your missions. So cool, missions. So we'll go over and we'll move to the table if I've got any time left. And we'll talk about actually the specific missions. Meetings are usually kind of tough. So, great. So this is the table. For the most part, I think it's set up how it should be set up when you first come to a table. I'm just going to go through the missions in order to try to familiar you guys with the scoring and what scores and what doesn't. Everything looks pretty good. Cool. So mission 1, space travel. That is this thing. That is, you want to move the payloads from west to east. The criteria for it to score is that the payload is clearly past the first intersection, which is here, and then it must do so independently. So that would mean your robot could come up here and encourage it and start it, and then let's go, and it travels down there by itself. There are 3 carts. One, the vehicle cart starts up here in the orange. There's a crew cart and a, what is that called? A payload cart, I believe. And the payload cart, they're each worth different amounts of points. It's probably based on weight and difficulty. But so launch your first one, a robot. You can load it onto a hook or whatever, anything like that. Load it on and then push it. As long as it gets past this line, you're good, and that scores. So that's all 3 score. They don't have to make it all the way to the end again, just past this line. So mission 1, that's scored. And they're
Can I ask you a
scored.
quick question about that one?
They're scored independently.
Can I touch it?
Sure.
Can they just have the robot
Sure.
push it up?
Yeah,
Okay. Since
however-
you didn't do it, I thought maybe that wasn't supposed to do it. So
I am intentionally I'm giving as little detail as
Okay.
possible because I'm not trying to tell you how to do a mission. I'm telling you the criteria for it to score. So if you
Okay.
guys want to lift it up, if you want to stab it this way, if you want to smack it, however you do it, whatever happens, that is, as long as it is independent, when it gets past that point and it gets past that, we're good.
okay.
Solar panel array, this guy. So each year, FLL tries to do a cooperation model where you have to, a model that is shared between the 2 tables. So when you come to a competition, there will be an exact table opposite right here. So it'll be the exact same thing mirrored, and then 2 teams will be going at the same time. So this is a mission where your score can be affected by what the other team does as well. So there's a whole chart inside the rules and telling you what scores and what doesn't. If you move your solar panel away from you, if you angle it towards the other team's field, it's 18 points for you. If the solar panels are angled the same way, it's plus 22 for both sides. So it is a little bit tricky to score, but if you push yours away, it's 18. If they push theirs, they get 18. If you get them on the same side, if you push yours and they pull theirs, you each get 22, and then you get 18 because yours is facing towards them. So again, there's a breakout of it here, and once you look at the chart, it'll make a lot more sense. But there can be some strategy to this. There's 3 positions, so there's back, center, and forward. So there's strategy here based on what you want to do, because maybe you want to wait for the other team to push or pull theirs first, and maybe you have 2 missions that whatever it is, it matches theirs. So mission 3, 3D printing. So I don't know why that is before the other one. We're going to skip and we're going to go to extraction. So mission 5 is extraction. So there are 4 core samples here. The gray ones are regolith, the blue one is water, and the white one is gas. So if you get all 4 of these off the axle, that is worth points, 16 points. If you can move the gas into the lander, which is over here, that is worth even more points. If you can move, or if you move it into base, it's worth less. If you place the water, so it is only supported by the food module up here, that is worth points. And then the regolith here is used in mission 3. So if you place a regolith core sample into the 3D printer, it'll kick out a brick, the little red brick. So if it is ejected and not completely in the northeast planet area, it is worth 18 points. If you can get this brick over to the northeast planet area, it's worth more points. Cool, but you have to get the regolith off of here before you do that mission. Crater crossing. Basically, some object needs to come through here and lower the gate down. If the gate is all the way down and the object that came through here, if all of its weight was bearing down and this is down, then it scores that mission.
It doesn't have to completely cross over it.
It does. Has to completely cross over it. Crossing must be from east to west and make it completely past the flattened gate.
Okay.
So whatever that object is must come completely 100% over.
Oh, so you can push something else.
I mean, you can do whatever you want.
Okay.
I mean,
All right, I hadn't thought about it.
yep. The wording on that is also very loose.
Thank you.
Extraction we went over. Space station modules. How many people here have actually assembled one of these kits and have played with it? Any of you? Have you played with that one yet?
No. I don't touch them once I get them together.
This is an insanely difficult mission in my. This one and this one are insanely difficult. So there are modules in the space station, and what you do with the modules scores you different amounts of points. So this is how it will start. If you move the cone module completely into base, so if this comes out and it goes completely into base, worth points. If you transfer this dock module, pull it out, move it over here to the east side, it is worth points. And then if you move the, what is this, the tube module into the west side, it is worth points. Yeah. So, yeah, that is, I mean, you even pulling, if you don't get it to, like, if you don't pull it straight out, even, it's kind of tough. So this is a very difficult mission, guys. And then moving the little space guy inside of here is worth extra points too. So that one might be pretty easy.
Can you just do one part of that? Like, could we just move the space guy?
Sure, absolutely. Any of these are independent. So if you pull, for example, this guy right here, the dock module is not worth anything if you just pull it out. Or if you take this back to base, it's not worth any points. It's only worth points if you put it into
There's no
this
point in
side.
doing that if you can't put it back in the other
Correct,
side.
exactly. Yep. But maybe you can do the cone module, and if you can pull the cone module out and bring it back, that's worth points.
Okay.
So, but they're all independent of each other. But I mean, that is crazy hard. I'll leave that in
And it
there.
has to be all the way in there, doesn't it?
Fully seated. Yep.
So no benefit of it.
Yep. Spacewalk emergency. Okay, so aerobic exercise. So that is this model over here. So when you lift these levers, it's on a little gear system, and you'll see this little yellow axle. It'll start all the way counterclockwise past the gray, all the way bottomed out. And as you push these little levers, it's going to slowly increment that yellow. So the further that you get this thing, the more points it is worth. This one, when you get all the way to the end, I'm impatient. When you get all the way to the end, it will max out and stop at its maximum setting. So if you go crazy on it, it will not descore itself. It'll stop at its maximum scoring, which is good. So, and again, they're worth different amounts of points depending on the further the better. And then the strength exercise, there's a bar here that you can lift up. But as you can see, it's lifting the mat. It's got quite a bit of resistance on it. So, but if you can lift this one to where the fourth hole is visible, then this mission scores. Food production, this guy. You have to push this so far until the green is shown. So anywhere in here is considered score. If you push it too far and yellow is showing, that's no score. So you've got to push it just right to get that to score. There we go. Green scoring.
You can't go green, past green and come back.
You can.
You can?
It's when the mission is ended. Yep. You can go all the way in and then back out a little bit, as long as it ends with the weight showing green, and it's anywhere between there, all the way like at a 45 and down at like 90. So anywhere in there. Escape velocity. This tower thing. This is gonna. You guys might want to remove this off of the table until you. So. There was a very interesting model that we had a plane a few years ago that attached here and had a string that went to a runway. And it was the first thing that every single student did every single day and drove everybody nuts. And this is going to be that mission this year. So you're going to have kids that are going to sit here and play with this for hours and hours and hours. So, but it's pretty self-explanatory. You need to hit this, cause this little ship to reach escape velocity and stick up here by itself. So if it stays up here, that's considered scored. But the mission is very specific. It says that it stays up by pressing and hitting the strike pad only. So you can't have a robot just come over here and lift this. It has to be by the strike pad. Satellite orbits. So there is a satellite here and two that start in base. These are worth points if any part of the three satellites are in between these two lines. So not scoring. This is scoring, scoring, scoring. barely scoring, and then these two are the same way. So anywhere along this axis. If you want to shove them in the corner so they're out of your way, that's fine. Observatory. So this thing right here, this freely rotates, and it is worth, very similar to the strength exercise, it's worth fewer points in the gray, more points in the white, and the most points in the orange. But unlike that one, you can go too far. So if you are not in the orange, then it's not worth anything out here. So, you know, if your robot's pushing it, is it worth risking possibly going over in the orange? Yep, it's up to you guys. So, but you can go over on that one.
I have a question. The satellites that are in the, over there,
Yep.
can you carry them both at the same time?
Sure. If it doesn't say you can't, you can.
Okay.
Did you say there were points for the white or no points for the white?
Yes.
Partial points for the white and then.
Less, more, most, none. Yeah, all that effort wasted. Bummer. I will see it. I will see it a lot. Kids will be crushed. It's tough. It's so tough.
It worked at home.
It worked. No, it worked every time at home. Every time I hear it. So meteoroids, one starts in base, one starts on a little rubber ring. You need, as I was saying, satellites in the way. So you want to get a meteoroid inside of the, what do they call that? The meteoroid catcher is what that is called. So your robot somehow, your robot needs to launch this without, it needs to be moving independently by the time it crosses this line and must remain independent all the way until it gets into here. So your robot can kick, launch, slap, whatever, this ball to get it into the meteoroid catcher. Too hard, it'll go over. It is worth more points in the center. It is worth less points in the sides. It's worth no points if it's anywhere else. If you shoot the ball, be warned, wherever it lands, it stays. It is not one of those missions where, hey, now it's in my way, can you remove it? Wherever it lands, it stays. So if it wedges here and it's going to mess up your other mission, then maybe you should save that mission for the very end so it doesn't potentially mess up your other ones.
And it can only be hit behind that line.
Yep, it has to stay
So you
west of this
you
line.
can't go over and have a second try.
So actually you can. So the other ball, so one is resting on a rubber ring outside here, and there is one exception to the you cannot touch anything out of base rule, and that is that ring. So after you launch this ball and it leaves, wherever this ring is, anyone, ref or student, is allowed to pull this out and get it out of the way. So that is the one exception for anything that you can touch out here. So now what you could also do is if you've got a second ball out here, you can launch with that, and then you could have a potential to try to shoot that guy in there and maybe get more points. If you make them both in the middle, they both score. If you make them both in the sides, they both score. So you have two sets for that. If you want to go out here, grab the ball, bring it back to base, then we'll remove the ring. Then you can bring both of them out. You can launch both of them. Sure, that's fine.
You just can't
That's just where
remove
it's-
the ring until the ball is off of it.
Right. So the lander. This corner. So the lander's in two pieces. It's held up by here. If you push down on this orange bar, it will release the lander. It is worth points if it is completely in this section assembled, completely in the planet assembled, or assembled or disassembled in the base. So if you launch this without catching it, you see how easy that is to break. So they just come out very, very, very easily. If you launch this, it will pretty much guaranteed to break in half and not be intact, and then it doesn't hurt you any, it just doesn't count for any points. So figuring out a way to delicately carry this, and then it has to be touching the mat intact for it to score.
So did you say you could not catch it?
You can.
Oh.
Not catching it, it's going to shatter and break, and it's not going to
So if
score
it's
you
in
points.
pieces on the planet, it doesn't count.
Correct. Yep. It has to be this, the top has to be in the bottom, and the axles have to be down inside of the gray holes for it to be considered
But you
assembled still.
Can take it broken back to base.
You can. Yep. If you want to catch it, if you slap it down and then you want to grab a rake and drag it back, that's fine. Or if you don't want to risk, if you can't reliably get this to touch down and it be seated, then you can just catch it and bring it back to base with you if you want.
Does it have to be sitting on the mat?
Yes, touching the mat. Yep. And I believe that's for both of them. Yep, touching the mat. So, and if it's up over on its side, I haven't come across a situation where it's been on its side and not still intact, by design, of course. So it pretty much needs to be like that. Now, it doesn't say that nothing else can be touching it. So if you have something that catches it and is now holding it like this, you know, wherever it's touching is still inside the planet and it's holding it, you know, you're good. And then the last thing is interruption. So the red discs that are over here, every time that a technician has to touch the robot outside of base and bring it back, you get a touch penalty that goes in the corner. And that's just a tally to keep up. It's minus 3 points every time, up to negative 18. So and that's it. They stay in the corner. Yeah, I think that was all the missions.
Did you say this already? Do you have to launch this first meteorite before you bring yours out of base?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. You can do it anything, pretty much anything in any order on the field. Obviously, you cannot eject the 3D printing thing without a regolith sample. If you do, then the brick does not count. Or if you get the wrong color in there, if you get the gas or the water, then it just says it has to be regolith, the gray one.
What
So-
about this? If your team pushes it,
Yep.
they get points, but if they come back later and fix it to where it matches the other teams, do they get extra points, or if they only get scored once for?
It's at the end of the match. So all
Okay.
scoring is done at the end of the match. And depending on where theirs is. So so let's say, for example, you come out and you push yours, the other team comes out and pushes theirs, and you say, oh shoot, we're only getting 18 points. You can come out, grab yours, pull it back. Now you get 22, they get 22, and they get 18.
Can I go push theirs?
Does it say you can't?
Okay.
I haven't read it yet. So.
Not read mine yet.
Cool. Any other questions? Any clarifications? As you put your kits together and you play with these, you're going to realize, wow, that looks simple and it's really not. It's something. When I was mentoring teams, I was always very clear to my students that it may look easy, and I say it doesn't look easy. It's very straightforward. There's a big difference between just push that a little bit. Well, a little too much means nothing. So, but yeah, you'll figure out which missions are a little bit easier, which ones you can do reliably, which ones you can tag on to other missions, and. Yep.
So just for clarification,
Sure.
If they build something to push over this, does it have to completely clear, or can it be left partially on there?
Well, I mean, it could potentially, part of it could cross over and still be on there.
So, all weight-bearing features of the crossing equipment must cross completely between the two towers, and the crossing must be from east to west and make it completely past the flattened gate. So if you have, for example, if you have a robot with an arm that sticks out and over, and you're driving, and you drive and it goes this way, and that wheel comes completely over, and now you want to go this way for a mission, the robot is bearing weight of some of that wheel, and the robot did not go over. So even though the piece that, the wheel that rolled out here, even though that went completely over, that the robot is bearing weight of that wheel with a connected rod. So that mission would not count.
What about if your piece is completely in the air? You don't actually have any weight bearing, you just push the bar down.
Then your weight, if you're coming from this way, then your weight bearing is back here, and it hasn't crossed,
And
so it
that's-
doesn't count.
Okay.
So what if the robot drives up on there partially? I mean, if you built a separate rover, and you pushed it over, and your robot did go up on the crater field, but it didn't actually cross it. It just pushed that mechanized part over, and then it reversed.
And it left a detached rover out here.
Yes.
If the robot is not bearing any weight on that, that looks okay to me.
Okay, but it actually, your robot physically has to come up on the crater field's sun. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying that.
You're
I'm
not.
saying that whatever makes this
So
lever
that-
go
that-
down
that
has to
extra
cross
one that you're
completely.
making could be the
Okay.
weight bearing.
Okay.
Thing.
What?
The extra one that you're making could be the weight bearing.
Would
one.
have to
Yes.
be the weight bearing.
Okay.
Yep.
And it would
Yep.
go across.
Yeah, if you're pushing a transported object,
Yes.
the robot isn't bearing any of the weight. All the weight is down. So you just push that thing over, and as long as the weight bearing object made it completely over here, then you could back off and leave that piece here. Sure.
Okay. There we go.
Yep.
So, Derrick, is the rule still that the robot has to be completely in base before they pick it up when it comes back now?
For penalty free, yes.
Yes.
Yep.
That was one thing that got us. last
And
year.
is that the line, or is that?
That wasn't always the case,
It
right?
was not. Nope.
Okay.
Nope.
We didn't get that memo.
Boy, they muddied the water like 2 years ago. Boy, they really muddied the water, and they have since fixed it. But it
Is that the
yeah.
line, or is that the edge of the plant?
The black line, the black solid line is the baseline.
And that,
Yep, every part of it.
that rule about having to launch it every time it's in base too, that's intact still, right? Because last year, remember, my team just had timers on it, didn't relaunch it. It came back, they just reoriented it and let it go. But I think you corrected us on that. We had to actually push a button or
you
trigger
really
the
did?
launch again.
Oh, I didn't know that.
By the rules, if
We
you
got
have,
away with it until the very last thing, and then he said,
And
I
then I
think you're
noticed.
doing it wrong.
so by the rules, in the end, does it really make a difference? Absolutely not. But by the rules, if your robot comes in and you mess with it, you interact with it, and then you walk away, and a person does not initiate the launch, then it's not a legal launch. But if you had an ultrasonic sensor on top and it came back and then you just waved at it and you don't
Or
physically
touch.
touch it at all, a person initiates the launch, and that satisfies it.
Yeah.
It's very petty. I don't like it. Would it affect your team? Absolutely not. But it's a rule. So.
Wasn't there also a sensor you used to could not use? Last year, wasn't there a sensor you were not allowed to use?
Not that I know of. Nope. You can use any sensor it gives you a picture of all the sensors you're allowed to use, and pretty much if it's an official Lego sensor that Lego makes, you can use it.
Okay.
If it's made by a third-party company that is compatible with EV3, you're not allowed to use it.
Similar question to that. So, like, Lego string, do you have to order Lego string, or can you use, you do? That's what I thought. And same with like Lego rubber bands, they would have to be actual Lego rubber bands. Cool.
But you can find out, if you do research online, you can find out what those are and order them,
That makes sense.
and he would.
I would never know.
It'd be identical, or he wouldn't give you everything.
Right.
He would be in trouble. He would be in trouble.
Right, right. That makes
You
sense.
wouldn't know.
Lego doesn't make the
I guess they're
string
not,
or
yeah,
rubber
they're not
Correct.
manufacturing their own
Correct.
string, I'm
Right.
guessing.
That's right.
So, did I hear a question earlier about moving the other team's solar panel?
Yes.
Okay, so I do think if the solar panels are positioned so that you get 22 and your opponent gets 40, and then you were to move them both in the other direction, then you would get 40 and they would get 22, and that
And
would
you
violate the
can't.
interference penalty, right?
I was looking that up, and
Yeah.
when I was going to the next question.
So that would violate, there's a rule called interference.
So if
you
it-
can't do anything to reduce their
Just don't
score.
touch it.
That's a better way to put it. Thank you.
Right.
What's that?
I couldn't think of the way to put it as
To
he's just
to
like
take points from them?
The interference rule says you're not allowed to do anything that negatively affects the other team's score.
Right.
So you could move their thing
You could
if
increase
they
it. But
hadn't
import-
tried to move it.
Correct.
Well,
Or
that would actually help them, so that
Yes.
wouldn't violate.
Yeah.
But you don't know that until the match is over. How do you know that?
Right.
Yeah, well, that's the.
I mean, they could tell me at the end, we were gonna do that one, but they,
Right.
I don't know how you
Right.
could prove that.
Right.
So everybody just needs
How did that impact last year?
so if they push theirs, don't touch it.
Yeah.
In the end, you save them time, they can run a different model.
I think all that would have to happen, what I would recommend, so this is, Derrick's not in the business of recommending because he's the rep, so I can recommend it. So the recommendation that I would have is to discuss this, you're gonna know in advance who's gonna be at the other table. So have your kids discuss with their kids what they
Discuss what you
wanna
guys do
do.
in that one.
And then if Derrick or another referee sees you move the other team's solar panel, as long as they don't freak out, like, what are you doing touching our solar panel, then he's gonna let it go. Because he's gonna assume that that's something that the two of you have discussed.
So they can discuss it.
Absolutely.
The only time that I think that it would matter is if yours was pulled and they pushed theirs.
Right.
That's
Right.
the only time, and if in that case you wouldn't want to touch them anyway.
Right.
So-
So I think in most cases, you wouldn't want to mess with theirs. Right. Or if you messed with theirs, they'd be happy.
I guess I was probably thinking that if they didn't do theirs and. I
If
wanted
they,
Correct.
the
but
points.
if they pushed theirs and you hadn't touched yours yet, and you pushed yours, pushing theirs would get them more points.
Correct. That's
So,
right.
so it would only matter if you pulled and they pushed.
And then
That's
you
the only
switch.
time you don't touch theirs.
Right.
So,
Right.
so yeah, it's confusing. So if
Unlikely to be an
What
issue
is the,
qualifier.
what is the
So
penalty?
don't mess with them.
they get the full score and you don't,
So you don't get any score? on that?
it would be scores if you didn't mess with it. No, it would de-score you.
I'm saying if you pull yours and then you're scheduled, and then you plan to pull theirs as well,
That would score. That would be
That's
fine.
fine.
That's
That's
fine.
right.
If both of them are pulled to this side, and you say, I want to score, instead of just scoring 22, I want to
so
score
that would
18
benefit
plus
them.
22.
If I pull mine this way and then pull theirs this way.
That would benefit them.
Benefits
Yep.
them, okay.
Yep. I don't think that situation will come up where you would have to move both of yours. You'd have to move theirs and then yours to get a penalty.
Have you seen anything on the forums about this yet?
I looked a little bit. I didn't get to satellite. I got to some other.
So,
Other things.
my expectation is that there's gonna be some kind of clarification issue. And they may rule, a few years ago, world class, was that the balls in the tower?
Oh yeah, where they.
So that was actually not cooperative, that one was actually competitive, right? And so this one has a little bit of a competitive flavor to it because it could be 40 to 22 this way or 40 to 22 the other way. So they may issue some kind of update that says, have at it, right? Because the solar panels hang over the middle of the field, so they're kind of there, you know. So that there may be some, I wouldn't be surprised if there was some kind of challenge update where they said, the solar panels are fair game, right? The interference rule does not apply to the solar panels. So if you have time, because the scoring is based on, you know, you don't really get the points until the end of the game, and, you know, anyway, and so,
So then you might get 40.
and then they switch it before the end of the match, and then they get, yeah, so they may allow it. I just don't know that it's really.
They push and we pull.
But let's go ahead and say now that this is an issue, that's an issue that's, probably gonna come up, not a qualifier.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely not a qualifier issue. Right. Any other questions? Clarifications?
All right, we'll take Derrick.